Welcome back. Today we will start with lecture 4. In lecture 3 we have started looking at the socio-cultural factors in the environment of the child, the growing child, and how those factors might impact a child's language acquisition and the various domains within the language acquisition in the larger language acquisition area. So, for example, vocabulary size, grammaticality, conversational rules and so on. So, we also looked at epistemic trust and various other factors. Now, we will look at a couple of more factors, geographical factors, statistical learning, social brain and so on. So, with respect to geographical factor, let us see what we have. So, child's microsystem includes the immediate surrounding, that is what we have been discussing till now. Microsystem means the caregiver and the child, which is the immediate vicinity of the child. So, it can maximally extend to the family, but he is also part of a larger area, larger geographic location, which pertains to what we call exosystem. So, exo is outside, indo is inside. So, exosystem is the larger outer world, bigger world within which the child functions. So, that also has a role to play in terms of the language acquisition practices or language acquisition milestones, or simply the kind of words the child learns. So, location is found to influence the words to which the child is exposed and the number of words the child knows. For example, the climate and the terrain in the child's environment might influence the terms a child knows for weather condition, food and clothing variations and all types of flora and fauna. This is almost commonsensical, but there are some interesting studies that have looked at, for example, children speaking in Afrikaans will have a higher number of words at the same age with respect to the other kind of Western languages. Now, Afrikaans, you might be already knowing that Afrikaans, though it sounds like an African language, but it is actually a variety of Dutch. So, spoken in Africa, so South Africa. So, it is a language, it is a variety of Dutch. However, if you compare Afrikaans with Dutch, you will see a lot of variation in the vocabulary even in the adult speech. It is simply because of the environment in which they grow up. So, there have been studies on metaphors also in Afrikaans language, where the usual metaphors have a very different source domain. I am talking about adult language, that also is there, that also has been studied. So, source domain for metaphor in Afrikaans and Dutch differ, even though they are varieties of the same language. So, it as a result, automatically it also derives from there, the children also will learn words that are different with respect to the genres they belong to, the semantic domain they belong to. So, if you are living in a domain where you have larger, more variety of flora and fauna, the children will learn those names more often, more frequently and more often. They will have a higher vocabulary in those domains. So, that is the idea. So, in this you also have the division between the rural and the urban domains. So, some children who are living in the rural area will have a different kind of vocabulary with respect to the urban children. So, we have already looked at this particular study. This is where they have looked at some urban rural division was also one of the variables. So, Spanish speaking children in Argentina and American English speaking urban children in US have larger expressive vocabulary, we have already seen this, but rural on the other hand in Italy they found that the children had higher number of verbs. So, rural life differs from urban life in many ways, and some of these differences might affect language learning. So, for instance, mothers in urban areas, for example, in case of Bali, this has been studied by Williams et al. In 2000, urban areas in Bali, they expect their children to acquire verbal assertiveness at a very young age than rural mothers do. So, when you have when you inspire your children to have that, to be confident speaker. Nowadays, you have various kinds of programs for children to be confident speakers, stage speakers and so on, but in certain cultures it is already embedded. This is one such case where mothers want children to be verbally assertive. So, as a result of which they are found to have better expressive vocabulary. So, that is about our geographical location, geography having an impact on your on children's language acquisition. Let's move on to statistical learning. We have looked at statistical learning before as well when we were talking about phonological acquisition, as to how children probably map the kind of positions in which certain phonemes occur, and based on that idea they probably figure out how to how to segment the speech stream. So, for example, we have talked about the pretty baby example before as well. So, the question was, do infants learn by computing the probabilities of sound combination? This has been an old question, and there are very interesting findings, and it seems like children are statistical wizards to some extent. So, the case of pretty baby, so pre and t occurring together, it will most of the time mean that it is a word internal combination versus t and babe is the word inter word kind of a combination. So, this is something that if the children figure out, then they will be able to segment the speech. So, a simple statistical inference using relative frequency of co-occurrence of the sound, relative frequency of the co-occurrence of the sound is used by infants to find the word boundaries. That is the idea proposed by the statistical learning hypothesis. Now, this has led to the hypothesis that experience dependent mechanisms might be strong enough to influence language acquisition. So, depending on the kind of language environment you are in, and then the child's experience of it will automatically have an impact on the statistical learning, because they are basically trying to find the frequency, relative frequency of the co-occurrence, and thereby finding it out. So, because these experiences will in turn motivate innate statistical learning capacities, that is what this theory says. But there are some problems, we have seen this before also. We will go through some of the issues that have been flagged in this domain, that not always this will help. So, however, before we go there, the debate here is between the statistical property of the language input and the innate knowledge of the language system. So, is there a tussle between these two? So, the kind of relative frequency in which certain kinds of combinations come in, will that be enough, or will it have a kind of a confrontation with the innate language knowledge of language system the child is born with? So, some scholars have actually this is not a very easy thing, the debate has been quite strong. So, some scholars have said that Chomsky and his followers underestimated the power of learning and thereby overestimated the need to build language specific knowledge into the organism in advance. So, while experimental results do provide strong support for the remarkable computational ability of the child or the human brain in infancy, it does not solve all the problems, as I was just beginning to say. For example, infants at very early age are remarkably aware of the sounds of their language, hence the already existing knowledge may constrain their induction from the input. They already know it, right? We have already seen how early the children have been experimented upon to check how the level of their understanding of the sounds of their language, and we have seen that a few days old children also have shown remarkable abilities. So, if that is the thing that they are almost born with, what is the role of statistical learning? That is the understanding. So, if they already know, this will constrain their induction from the input. Thus, infants might be looking for confirmation of categories like words that is already present in their mind. So, they may not be learning from the inputs, but they might be just confirming, cross checking with the existing words. And frequency effects might strengthen the induction, that is all it might happen, it might be doing. Also, determining what boundaries must override statistical probabilities. For example, differentiating between about the flu and about of the flu, or your versus your, and so on. So, these kind of things are difficult for statistical learning. So, you have to find out whether it is a word boundary, actual word boundary, or it is a co-occurrence, and then the child has a difficult task at hand. Similarly, the need to determine that walked, walks and will walk involve the same word. So, this has to be rule bound, this has to be based on the underlying system, the structure that the child has already in place. It cannot be dependent on the statistical learning. They need to find out that even if they are having different surface forms, they are actually the same word. So, that kind of an argument has been placed. In some languages, intra-word and inter-word probabilities may not provide adequate information about word boundaries. So, it may not be as simple as the pretty baby example. In some languages, the difference between the word internal and word inter-word combinations might be occurring in the same kind of relative frequency. So, they might be equally possible. So, one example for the Bantu language, one particular Bantu language Bokusu, where the OU combination, UO combination can be are equally possible in the word boundary as well as within word. So, in this kind of a scenario, it will not help. The statistical learning will not help. So, this is the statistical learning with respect to the input that they get. So, the input that they are getting, on the basis of that they are using the statistical knowledge and thereby inducting the information, but there are cases where there might be problem. Now, let us move on to cross cultural differences. So, generally speaking, the children all around the world, across languages, across communities, they will have similar kind of stages of language acquisition that is well attested already. So, as normal children have the foundation of language acquisition in place by 3 years, and that 3 years the stages of those 3 years are similar. However, some differences do exist. Some examples we have here. In a cross linguistic study involving French, English, Japanese and Swedish infants, late babbling and first words were compared. Japanese infants produced their first words 2-3 months later than the others. Age of attainment of the first 25 words also were delayed for them. So, other than Japanese, so French, English and Swedish children learnt their words faster, and their number of vocabulary was also better than the Japanese in the age controlled group. So, Japanese in general were delayed, Japanese children were delayed. So, the Japanese and American mothers speech here needs to be looked at. So, there is a difference between the Japanese mothers and the American mothers language used to their children. American mothers provide object labels in their infant directed speech. So, the motheries in America, they use more of object labels. So, if you have object labels more, that means automatically you learn more nouns, more words, more things that have a referent in the immediate environment. On the other hand, Japanese mothers use objects to engage the child in the social routines. So, the mothers in Japanese mothers do not really teach them labels, but teach the children as to how that object is useful in a social scenario. So, they give the bigger picture on the one hand, but the American mothers, they will first use the label for the objects and then thereby children learn. So, this kind of different techniques of teaching or different techniques embedded in the mother's speech towards the child probably is at the root of the children learning vocabularies at different ages. Hence, there are some differences in linguistic and cultural input across the different kinds of languages. So, based on these various kinds of findings, Kuhl has proposed the idea of social gating hypothesis. What she basically means is that gating social interaction creates a vastly different learning situation, one in which additional factors introduced by a social context influence learning. So, basically what she is saying is that there are various other things in the environment that helps learning language by the children. So, there are other functions which are part of this. So, one is the attention and arousal. We have looked at attention and arousal when we discussed about Luria's theories of language. Then information, a sense of relationship and activation of brain mechanisms linking perception and action. So, now attention and arousal are known to affect learning in a wide variety of domains, as Michael Posner has shown. Attention is one of the most important higher mental functions that humans have and this is what is useful for various kinds of learning, including language. So, if you are taking attention as one of the key ingredients in language learning, then it will automatically be having a positive outcome. So, that is why she has included this. And then there is a brain mechanism, activation of brain mechanism, which links this kind of things between perception and action. So, heightened attention and arousal could produce an overall increase in the quality and quantity of the speech information. Basically, heightened attention will result in better language learning, and as a result language production. That is the baseline. Recent data suggest a role of attention in adult second language phonetic learning as well. Also, infant attention was found to be significantly higher in response to the live person than to the inanimate source. So, attention, we just looked at in the previous lecture, we looked at epistemic trust, where children attend to people they trust more. And who are those people they trust more? One is the people who belong to their own group, own in-group. In-group could be based on the racial identity, or in-group could be somebody they know, familiar person. So, extending this, so if they know the person, they will focus their attention more on that person. Now, you take it a little, take a long shot. This also is by studies also by Cole's group. So, they found out that children tend to attend more to a real human being than an inanimate object. So, it is easier to learn from a human than from, let us say, a robot or something of that sort. So, this is because the attention level is higher when they are talking to, or when they are interacting with a human. So, the degree to which humans interact and engage, infants interact and engage socially, this is the important part, with the tutor in the social language learning situation correlates with learning. So, if you are attending, you will be learning more, that is a simple thing. But for children, this also has the epistemic trust and other factors embedded, and at the root of all of these is the attention as a mechanism. That is the most important part of this theory. So, social interaction may activate brain mechanisms that invoke a sense of relationship, that is the core of it, and then between self and the other. So, in constant interaction with a person, knowing them, getting familiar with them, and as a result of which a sense of relationship forms, which is what we call in-group relation, and then at the same time the brain mechanisms will be also tuned in, so to say. So, social understanding systems that link perception action, and that will immediately also get co-activated. So, your interaction and underlying which is the attention, this in line also activates the brain mechanisms, and then you connect perception and action together. So, this is a kind of a network that Patricia Kuhl's theory proposes, and others have also supported. Now comes the role of brain. Now, the human brain is the seat of all the actions, or let us say all the planning. So, the role of brain in the language domain also has been studied extensively for a long period of time. So, this is a given. Both sides of, or let us say all the sides of the theoretical divides in linguistics, they agree that brain is one of the most important players in this entire game. So, brain's role in language acquisition refers to the biological foundation of language faculty. When Chomsky says that we are bioprogrammed, what he means is that the brain has a component or some sort of a software that makes us learn language, and from there only the idea of biological foundation of language faculty came. So, of course, Chomsky was not the first person to say this. We know that Paul Broca found out that language is localized in the left hemisphere. So, this has been pretty, we have a long tradition here of understanding that the brain is the seat of language. So, Chomsky's theory on the brain basis of language popularized the idea of the modularity as well. So, not only the language has a biological basis in the sense that it has a brain basis, meaning it has a localized domain within the human brain. There is a specialized area in the brain which is called the language areas, and that is also the idea of Chomskyan theories is that idea that is modular. What does it mean? That the brain has specific areas which is designed for using language or producing language, understanding language and so on and so forth. So, it is a modular structure which has not much give and take with the other mental functions. So, each function is kind of segregated, that is the idea of modularity. So, Chomsky popularized these two things, the biological foundation of language faculty and the notion of modularity, Chomsky, Fodor and others. This is on the one side. On the other side, the empiricists believe in a distributed representation of language knowledge. Basically, it is kind of a network of systems. So, it is not one area in the brain, it is not a modular structure, but it is a distributed structure. Various areas in the brain need to work together to for us to be able to use language. And so, they call it some sort of a network of systems rather than a simple module in the brain. Thus, irrespective of the theoretical position, brain's role in language acquisition has been undisputed. Till here, there is not much of a problem. The only debate is whether it is one domain or it is a distributed domain, but it is all in the brain. Along comes Lenneberg. Lenneberg's 1967 work was pioneer in some sense in pointing out the biological and the maturational component of language acquisition. Brain structure, what he said was brain structure at birth does not necessarily point towards left hemisphere dominance in language. So, as the brain develops, as the child grows up, brain also matures at the same time. This is common knowledge that human brain continues to grow after birth. So, during that time my brain maturation happens, and as a result he says that it is not necessarily the left hemisphere dominance is not necessarily there in the very beginning. So, this feature grows from the age 2 onward, and this is exactly the idea, the logic on which the critical period hypothesis is based on, because the organization or say reorganization of the brain happens during this phase, age 2 to puberty, as a result of which that is also the time which is given for language acquisition. So, the left hemispheric dominance builds up during this time, and this is the theory called equipotentiality hypothesis. Equipotentiality, as the name suggests, that both the hemispheres of the brain are equally potentially equally responsible for language function. So, they start out in some sort of a equal fashion, they start out similarly, but over a period of time during brain maturation the left hemisphere takes over the job of doing the language related processes. So, the idea here is that both hemispheres of the human brain start out similarly. So, these are the keywords for us, then get specialized for certain functions. This is the idea of equipotentiality hypothesis. Later findings, however, do not agree with Lenneberg's idea that this and we now today of course, we know that this theory is not exactly tenable. Why is it not tenable? So, infants show anatomic and functional asymmetry from a very young age. So, what we are talking about is that anatomic and functional basically refer to the structure and the function. So, the brain, the two hemispheres are not exactly the same. That is what we are talking about. Anatomic asymmetry and functional asymmetry, of course, we already know. Different areas in the brain do different things, and not everything is not equally distributed, and that is there even in the very young age, young infants. Hence, Lenneberg's theory is probably not correct. For example, studies have been carried out on children, infants as young as 4 days old. They have shown right ear advantage for syllable and left ear advantage for musical sounds. In humans, the brain is the brain's control system is contralateral. What it means is that the right brain controls the left side of the body, left brain controls the right side of the body. So, if something is presented to your right ear or to the right eyes, right visual field, then it gets processed better in the domain of language. That is what they found out. So, right ear advantage means when in a dichotic listening task, the two ears are getting two different signals, chances are higher that you will be able to say what was played in the right ear better than the left ear, because right ear, the sensory input gets to the right ear, gets processed in the left hemisphere, and vice versa. So, they found in 4-day-old children that the same right ear advantage that we already know about. So, right ear advantage means left hemisphere advantage for language related tasks. So, right ear advantage for syllables and left ear advantage for musical sounds. So, all non-linguistic sounds are processed in the right hemisphere, hence the left ear advantage. 5 to 6 days old children are capable of connecting production of sounds with their auditory perception, and they did that in the left hemispheric dominant way. Remember our Lieberman's idea of motor hypothesis. So, this is what they are talking about, that the production they could connect the production with the perception. The study was like this. So, the infants were presented with video of women articulating certain sounds like ba, ma, something like this, some simple sounds. The video was played. In some cases, the video was played with audio. In some cases, they were played without audio. And among this, some cases the audio matched the video, in some cases the audio did not match the video. The videos were presented either to the right or the left visual field. The infants looked for longer duration to the video in the matched condition, and they did so predominantly when the video was presented to the right. This is what we are calling right visual field advantage or right ear advantage, meaning anything that is presented to the right side of your sensory input system will be processed in the left. So, because children did better in those stimuli that were presented to the right visual field, means that left hemispheric dominance is already in place, right. And when there was a mismatch, so the mismatch could be the sound, the visual input says that she is producing ma or ba, but the sound comes as ga. So, that is when this is a mismatch condition, but when you see ma and hear ma, this is a matched condition. So, this is how the experiment went. So, very small children also show left hemisphere dominance in case of processing language, hence Lenneberg's theory may not be tenable. So, as a result, over a period of time, lot of such studies have been carried out. After adequate amount of evidence has said that the equipotentiality hypothesis is not tenable. Now, we have something called a neo-Lenneberg hypothesis, which is kind of a softer version of the same theory. So, the softer version basically talks about that language relevant aspects of cerebral organization are dependent on language experience. So, it is not entirely that we are nothing is everything is starting from the beginning, everything is similar. They say that language experience has some role to play with respect to the cerebral organization. So, this hypothesis looks at language specific grammatical function and their localization in the brain, which might be different from one language to another. So, that is the neo-Lenneberg hypothesis. In any case, we now know that the brain anatomically has the language area already in place. Now, we have to look at how the language area, how the brain interacts with the outside world, the society, and that is where the idea of social brain comes in. So, social brain has been studied in terms of within various domains, starting with not only in neuroscience, but also in linguistics and anthropology, even evolutionary sciences. So, the idea is that how the brain developed, how it evolved has a role to play with respect to how humans evolved, because this is the same thing, brains evolving. So, that during the evolution of the human species, the change into a social brain has a lot to do with how we are today. So, social brain is the key component that allows humans to do what other primates cannot do. We are very similar to our other cousins, close cousins. However, we do certain things that they cannot do, and that is where apparently the idea of social brain comes in. Okay. The main cognitive abilities of the greater primates are primarily dependent on the management of social worlds. The same can be said about humans too. The creativity and flexibility are considered a form of adaptation to the challenges imposed by the social environment. So, we dependent on the kind of environment we are in, we adapt very quickly. that is something that is common to humans. There is nothing called a habitat for humans. Humans can be anywhere because we adapt very quickly. That is what we are talking about. So, this kind of a flexibility and creativity with respect to the brain's adaptation to the environment is the domain of social brain. So, the management of social relationships has led humans to the development of a brain that is kind of unique in the animal world. Now, this nervous system's role in the management of relations with other individuals emerges in these domains, as it is assigned to predict future, anticipate. So, predict and anticipate are connected, anticipate the consequences of one's own or other people's action, and to buy time. This is famously called to buy time. Basically, when we are engaging in any kind of social interaction, we not only are talking about here and now, but we can, because remember our theory of mind. So, that makes us capable of predicting what is going to happen, not predicting in the sense of Nostradamus, but predicting in the immediate future. If I do this, there is a consequence like this. So, that cause and effect relationship we immediately understand, and at a bigger level as well. So, not only one's own action, but also of others' action. So, this is the entire gamut of things that social brain is engaged in. So, the human brain's adaptation works at two levels: finding solution of problems imposed by the physical environment, that is one. First and foremost, you have to find a solution for the problem you are in. Secondly, which is very interesting, is competition with the other competing individuals for the solution of the same problem. Basically, the competition that we have with other people. That is how the society functions. We want to beat the other person to the same position, we want to score higher marks than my competitors, and so on and so forth. So, the adaptation of the human brain is based on these two things. Not only we find solution ourselves, but we need to find solution before the other person does. This results in social brain's ability to obtain information related to the intentional states of an individual and to identify the causes of his actions before he acts effectively. So, this helps us understand a very this makes us capable of cueing or let us say tuning in the very subtle cues in the environment, with be it humans, be it other things. So, many studies have also pointed out that it is not just the social brain that understands others' perspectives, that is important, but it is also the ecological brain. So, ecological brain as in the way the brain interacts with the immediate environment as well as the culture. So, environment comes in here. Since we are talking about the nurture factor, let us not lose sight of what we are actually doing. So, for one, a lot of brain development happens after birth till puberty. Beyond this, the development of the brain stops, but the development of the mind continues. So, the hardware is in place, software keeps growing till depending on whether you want it to grow, you can grow the software till as long as you are alive. Secondly, this makes the environmental impact a reality. Now, environmental impact is seen in various domains. Let us quickly go over to them. There are two kinds, natural environment and the cultural environment. Natural environment, let us talk about the human visual system. Now, human visual system is designed for doing various things. One is, of course, when you see something, you do not just, it is not one function, it is a multitude of functions built into one. We are good at depth perception, back and forth transition between 2D image and 3D representation, binocular vision, mental rotation of imagery, coordination between sight, sound, touch, and so on and so forth. However, seeing and perceiving are not the same thing. If anybody has read Oliver Sacks' books, you will know what we are talking about here. So, you might see, seeing refers to the collection of input through the sensory organ of your eyes. that is all. You are collecting the information, that is seeing, but perceiving is the second layer output of that information. So, you have taken the information, now you do all these things that we are talking about. So, the depth perception and various other things, and thereby you perceive the scene. There might be actually a divorce between the two, as I was just talking about Oliver Sacks. You will he talks about many patients who has a break between these two. Sensory input is there, but the perception is missing, that is possible. So, people who are born blind and have got their sight through medical intervention may see things immediately, because the machine is now working, but to really perceive what they see, they need an amount of experience. So, the brain needs experience in the real world in order to be able to function. The machine is in place, but experience is what makes it see things as it is. So, in terms of coordinating between the object and what it is like from other various sensory inputs. Similarly, to give you a small example, The Gods Must Be Crazy is a very famous film. So, there you see the Bushmen, the people who are very different from us. They have no sense of possession. They do not know what money is, what it means to own something, because everything is for everybody, that kind of society. Now, if let us just imagine you meet somebody who has never seen something called a photograph. Now, when we look at a photograph, we look at a 2D thing, 2D object, but we are able to mentally simulate the 3D-ness of the entire thing. The depth, the background, foreground calculation, everything happens because this is the way we are experienced. We know photographs, we know how it works, but for people who do not, it will take some amount of getting used to map the 2D onto the 3D representation. So, that is what we mean by experiences helping you perceive things, even though you might see it immediately, right. Similarly, toddlers learn to walk, stand by training, and then all that happens. Now, in terms of cultural environment, we know that from cross-cultural studies, even basic aspect of perception are often colored by the way the experience is modeled in a particular given scenario. So, a culture that is not familiar with two-dimensional representation, as I just said, may need to learn, right. Similarly, this is also a very well known finding that people who are used to carpentered environment, that is us, most of us, carpentered environment has less complexity in the surroundings. So, you have solid lines, you have clear contours, you have clear surfaces and so on. Regular angles, they are more prone to be fooled by certain kinds of optical illusions as opposed to people who live in more natural environments. So, in the natural environment, you are exposed to various kinds of permutation combination of the sensory input that we are in the carpentered environment are not there. So, overall experience has been found to impact the brain plasticity modulation as well as the structure of brain in terms of physical and cognitive growth. So, dependent upon interaction of the agent with the environment rather than just a passive experiencer. So, depending on how the agent interacts with the environment, we have various kinds of understanding that we generate. Within this idea, there is a very well known idea in psychology called affordances. Basically, affordances means that something like a complementary relationship between animals and their environment. So, what you can do, the action potential of a thing. For example, a tree is the famous example is that a tree is climb up able. Not necessarily will climb every tree that you see, but it is an action potential with respect to trees. This is what is called affordance in psychology. Now, this can be understood in terms of cultural terms as well. So, culture is a collection of practices that are inter-individual. It is a collective process made of generations of practices, values and related behaviors. So, brain is the site that collects all this information, all these experiences, and as a result neural connectivity might get modified, and they do get modified as some studies have already shown through sustained engagement with such kind of practices, as a result of which we create cultural models, and those cultural models have a direct connection to the neural activity. So, this is how you can understand affordance in cultural terms with respect to our social brain. So, this is where we complete the lecture 4, where we have started talking about the social brain. Thank you.